The Dollhouse, a place where fantasy meets reality, and a corporation can turn anyone into anything. Except apparently into fencers, that's outside their purview.
Shall we take this house wow? Okay, so let's take a closer look at that. It's a little bit difficult to tell what this guy, Fencer on the right, did and what this girl, Fencer on the left, did in response to it, but as far as I can tell, it looked like an overhead attack that she then parried with an overhead parry, also known as parry 5. The thing is, though, that kind of thing is only really relevant in Saber, which they are not doing. They are fencing foil. And there are two reasons why you don't really do any sort of overhead parries in foil is because there's never any reason to actually protect that area. First of all, this is a thrust only weapon, there's no cutting, so there's no reason to come in at such an extreme angle to come down and try to attack any sort of target area. The other reason is the main target when you do any sort of overhead cut is the head, which is not valid target area in foil. The head is off target area. So the only way that this would be possible is if someone came in from overhead and tried to do a flick and then tried to land on the opponent's shoulders. The thing is, that does happen. It's very rare, but it's not very common, and it's usually not done in a situation that can even be parried by any sort of overhead parry. The only thing that might work against that is maybe some sort of circle or a sweep, or step back, let them fall short. But the thing is, that sort of aim with that kind of attack is usually done in a scenario where the opponent is not able to easily see it coming. So usually they wait for an opportunity to do it so that the opponent either can't parry because they're for whatever reason, or they just don't see it coming. If this was a different weapon, it would be totally valid. Overhead cuts are one of the most common ways to attack in Saber, but it's the wrong weapon, so it doesn't really count. What happened immediately after that was a riposte by Fencer on the left to a low line, and Fencer on the right parried with a parry 7. It doesn't look too bad, and for actors, it was actually a rather nice placement. However, it's difficult to take seriously because basically just of how they're dressed. They have protective armor, gear. I mean, I don't really know what this is. It looks like leather, but they have covering over what is considered valid target area, but nothing else. Their arms are bare, they're not wearing gloves, and most importantly, they're not wearing masks. And like I just said, one of them attempted an overhead cut with a blade that you can't cut with. So already I don't like this scenario, this setup. I really hate it when someone tries to depict modern fencing without the proper protective gear, because that is like the first thing that they make sure you have before you actually fence someone. Like, it's absolutely required, even just in practice. So this sort of horsing around, if any sort of USFA official caught them doing this in real life, they might be banned from the sport, or at the very least given a very severe punishment. But that was within like the first 5 seconds, so let's keep watching. Maybe it gets better. That was a little bit difficult to decipher, but it looked like a odd sort of attempt at a feint that was eventually then parried by a circle 6. I didn't really see the counter parry because Fencer on the left came back with a riposte after the circle 6, but it was a little bit blurred. I'll see if I can see it again. Okay, so it was to a parry 8. It was there was a sliding sound, so it was difficult to really like tell that that's in fact what it was. But so I think it was just poorly executed. But he did go for a parry 8 and then did a riposte to her off target area. You can see here he actually arrives below the target area. He arrives on her leg, and that's not valid target area. So it's a little bit difficult to tell, but it doesn't even look like it made very good contact. It looked like it might have been a slap. But the fact that it's difficult to tell already tells me that it could have arrived. Sometimes very light touches like that do occur. But again, even if it turns out it is valid, it doesn't matter because it's off target. In foil, if you hit your opponent and they don't hit you, if you hit on target, then, yeah, touch is yours. If you hit them off target, even if your opponent didn't hit you at all, you don't get a touch. The action is halted and you start again. So she's giving him a point for something that he never would have gotten a point for. And like every piece of media with fencing in it, she says touche, it's pronounced touche. Occasionally, there are refs who speak in French who put an accent on the end of it, and I think that, coupled with the fact that when an English speaker sees the word touche spelled out, it looks like they should be saying, the extra A, but that's not the proper pronunciation. It's a small thing, but I think you can realize by now it really bugs me.
Not bad. You almost had me there.
Not good either. One more point and you win.
Is that all?
I realize it's supposed to be dramatic, but you can't do that. You can't cross. You can't lock blades. They're not in any sort of official scenario, which, in the privacy of your own home, you are physically able to do this kind of thing, sword fight without protective gear and with, total lack of rules. But the thing is, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to depict it as if they can actually fence, but then they throw in all sorts of dramatic gestures. They get rid of all the protective gear. They make it seem like, in my opinion, it looks like they're trying to make it a lot more medieval, but with like knowledgeable, experienced fencers, and that's just not the case. I mean, no fencer would fence with this sort of gear on. They might cosplay with it, that's what it looks like to me, but no one would actually fence with this. Because the thing is, like, even if you are covering the area that you're supposed to be aiming for, in foil at least, accidents happen. It's not like when I fenced foil, yeah, I would hit people in the off target area all the time. And I got hit in the off target areas all the time. It happens. So if you're going into even a practice bout with not the right kind of gear, then it's just a death sentence. Or at least a very painful sentence. So there's that. There's also the fact that they're using French grips. French grips are usually only professionally used in épée. The reason for that is because reach is probably most relevant in épée than it is in either the other two weapons. If you have a long arm in foil and saber, that can be an advantage, but is probably a bigger advantage in épée. So if you have a French grip épée, then you are able to grip it by the pommel. You do sacrifice a lot of blade control, but you gain an extra inch or two. So, if someone decides to use a French grip, they're usually gripping it further down the handle because, they've decided to base their style around that. It's totally valid. I don't know too much about épée, but from what I've seen, it looks to be like a 50-50 split between French grip and pistol grip. But I don't know of any like high level foil fencer who uses a French grip. Maybe there might be one out there who could have a French grip as, a reserve weapon in case, something breaks, and or maybe several of their weapons break and they have to use the very last one and it turns out to be a French grip. It's possible. But basically every foil fencer I've ever known or have heard of, once they get serious about it, will switch to the pistol grip. So the fact that they're using French grips means they're trying to go for style over functionality. Because I have seen plenty of, you know, you might call them weeb people who take up fencing because, it's the closest thing to sword fighting and maybe there isn't a HEMA club around, or maybe they don't even know what HEMA is. And they'll do fencing, but they'll try to sort of keep it as dramatic and close to the movies as they can. People like that tend to prefer the French grips or even the Italian grips in favor of the pistol grip. Now, French grips in foil are commonly used to teach beginners because they do sort of bring focus to certain things that allow your hand to properly control the blade. Which in my personal experience, I found if you use the pistol grip right away for beginners, it takes a little bit longer for them to learn certain things. If you start with the French grip and then eventually switch over to the pistol grip, then that's almost like a shortcut. However, you make the switch to the pistol grip because it's just, in terms of control, it's better. I don't know of any fencer who uses the French grip for the extra reach that they are able to get with it. The only people I see with French grips are, in this case, movie actors, because the director told them to, beginning fencers, and fencers who took it up and refused to acknowledge the fact that it's no longer a martial art, it is now a sport. But people like that end up dropping out after like a couple months. So they're doing a lot of stuff here. I really don't feel like getting into it too much, partially because the camera is cutting back and forth, and the particular streaming service that I'm watching this on only allows me to go in 10-second increments. I'm not able to go frame by frame. So it's difficult for me to sort of determine what they're doing, but I can just tell that, in this case, it would have been difficult to replace the actors with actual fencers because they're not wearing protective gear. If they had them wear protective gear, it would have been easy to, get stunt doubles who actually knew how to fence and, create a scene. But they sort of, drove themselves into a corner with this, for some reason, fascination of keeping the actors' faces on screen as long as possible. So it had to be the actors to do it, and it's clear that they don't know what they're doing because even though they're moving a lot and the camera is cutting everywhere, it's difficult to tell exactly what they're doing, every single action. Like, I can pick out an action here and there, but it's just very obvious that they don't really know what they're doing because there's a lot of wasted movement. There's a lot of, winding back before going forward. There's a lot of, they're leaning forward and backwards a lot, which can be a bad habit that real fencers do, but it's not nearly as common as what's happening in this scene. And they're just, like I said, they're just wasting all sorts of movement, but then they're not even moving in the right way. The movement that they are doing, even though a lot of it is wasted, is not being used in the right way. Foil bouts have a lot of footwork in them. You utilize the strip and your distance as much as your blade. It's really just, 50-50. But they're staying in pretty much the exact same spot, even though there's a strip laid out for them. So this was a sort of difficult exchange to really see, and honestly, once they locked blades and crossed and exchanged some banter, I stopped taking it seriously. So I'm gonna move on to the next segment and just kind of give it a blanket statement of what I said before about wasted movement, just unfamiliarity with their actions, stuff like that. So I'm gonna keep going. One thing I want to bring up is what Fencer on the right did there. He did a series of low-line parries. What's odd, though, is the first low-line parry that he did at the beginning of the scene was a 7, and then later on an 8. It was the same two parries as you just saw here. The problem is, the first time he does them, they're actually correctly executed. They're not exactly placed right, but most of it is correct. In this case, he kind of did them wrong, but it's a little bit difficult to tell because the thing is, every parry is named for the line that it protects. Earlier, I gave a name to one of them, the overhead parry, but that's kind of obvious. Other than that, every parry is named with a number. The 4 standard parries for foil are the 4, the 6, the 7, and the 8. The thing is, that's obviously, not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's, numbers in a little bit out of order and in a weird area. So the reason that the numbers are like that is because there actually are a whole lot of other parries, 1 through I think maybe 9 or 12. I honestly don't remember. But I know that, there are a lot of other parries that are no longer used. The reason for this is because, in every weapon's case, except maybe for epee, the target area was diminished, and there were other allowances involved. Like, I believe parry 1 used to be located where it was and named 1 because that was the easiest area to cover when you were first drawing your sword. So, examples like that, like situations that are no longer relevant, basically parries got discarded when it was discovered that they weren't useful. So that's why we end up with these parries with seemingly random numbers applied to them, is because they were picked from a list of parries because they were useful. So the thing is, you could make the argument that he's doing different parries, like maybe a 1 or a 2, although the 2 parry, which is occasionally used in Saber, does not look like that. But because I don't know the exact position of every single historical parry that existed, I can't for sure say if this was an attempt at one of those parries or just he did the 7 and the 8 wrong, because you're supposed to do it with the inside of your arm facing upward, not downward like that. It's difficult to tell if this was those certain parries done incorrectly, but the thing is, even if it was other parries that were technically done correctly that they pulled from a manual or something, it still displays the fact that this is a weird hybrid mix of classical and modern fencing, which just is not realistic. There are definitely a lot of things that fencers have discarded over the years because it just wasn't useful anymore. Or they found out that it was, maybe in like some situation far off, it was useful, but, especially with the introduction of electrics and the remaking of weapons to be lighter and faster, more flexible, and most importantly, safer, that just changed how fencers moved and interacted. And that changed, the type of techniques that we used. Some things were introduced, some things were discarded, some things were reshaped and reinvented. So the fact that he did them at all, parries like this with his wrist turned downwards, either means that he's using parries that are no longer in use, or he's using in-use parries and he's just performing them wrong. It's really hard to tell. And then this part, they go into the whole actual fighting scene, so I'm not going to look into that. I'm actually going to stop it there. There were a few things that I sort of glossed over, but like I said, partially because of how the camera is moving, and just partially because of how I'm viewing this personally, I don't really want to get into the every single detail of this. But looking at this overall, I mean, honestly, when I first saw this episode, I was kind of excited because, outside of this scene, I really love this show. But, when I saw this scene, at first I was excited because it was like, oh my gosh, Joss Whedon is, introducing fencing. But then I remembered how they did it in Buffy, and I was, thought, okay, maybe I should take this with a grain of salt. And I was 100% right. This was a very weird representation. Like I said, they took a lot of modern stuff and historical stuff and tried to smash them together, and all of it was performed by actors who just did not know what they're doing. But they couldn't replace them with extras because they got rid of the safety equipment, which already is like a big question mark. Like, why would you do that? I don't know. I went into this scene with high hopes, but not really knowing what to expect. And after seeing it, I'm not even sure like what I got out of this. It was just a weird mashup overall. So I guess I should give it a score for accuracy. I don't know. It's just so weird. I'm gonna go with, I think, a 6 out of 10. Because it's definitely not the best. I've seen better. But it's also not the worst. Except, like, I don't know. Like, some things weren't so much mistakes as they were just, why is that there? Like, it'd be like if you were watching a military movie and, you see, like, the Air Force flying in, and then you see, like, an old World War II or World War One, like, propeller plane going by, and it's like one of those old fighter planes. It's like, well, yeah, that's a military plane, and we are seeing the Air Force, but a bunch of F-22s just flew by. Why is that little thing there? So it's very weird. It's not a mistake. It's just like a lot of things shouldn't have been there. So it was, I don't know, from like watching this scene from a fencer's perspective was honestly kind of a roller coaster because I didn't know where it was going to be taking next. So I guess I had to give Joss Whedon some credit on that. That is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Bye.